I'm Tristan McGough, your philosopher at large, welcoming you to a seminar on self, where today we'll be considering the very basis of self-transformation, which is, as I've referred to it in our last session on the faculties of self-transformation, as the Gnostic self, indicating its essentially unitive nature, or as some say, your spiritual self. Last time in Seminar 6, we had grouped the 5 fundamental faculties of self under the general terms of self, conscience, sentience, intelligence, and vivacience. Now, I've also referred to those in other terms as, of course, modes of consciousness. So that here with the self, that would be intuiting. A conscience, its essential function is willing. Sentience is feeling, intelligence thinking, and vivacience doing or living. Now you recall this chart, and I've added something new this time. I've added the waking state because in terms of the 5 states of consciousness as outlined in the Yoga Sutras, they speak of everything from the disturbed emotional state that you may have or the somnolent state, and that can even take place during your normal functioning where you feel depressed mental energies and you start drifting off into daydreaming. And then there's distracted, which is of course what Heidegger spoke of as forfeiture. That is, the world is constantly closing in on us, demanding of us our attention, our time, and often our immediate vital response in terms of doing. Okay. So anyway, this has been added, but once again, in the present state of consciousness, when you are waking up, when you are transforming your consciousness, that is, you are self-aware. And this is an immediate self-referential intuition of self-consciousness, which is its own warrant of certainty. In other words, there's a transparency of consciousness which takes place and doesn't need a propositional inference in order to be understood. It's immediate, it's direct, it's intuitive. And in the same way, when you're going through your transforming consciousness in the present, and what we've been speaking about with our different cognostics, which is our exercises in self-transformation to actually affect self-transformation by causing self-transformation through deliberate willing, appreciative feeling, mindful thinking, and focused doing, focused activity. And this is very important, this focused acting part, because whether you are a professional attending to your daily routine at the office or factory or wherever you happen to work, as a farmer or as a creative doing graphic design, for instance, doesn't matter what you're doing. Once you get into that professional mode of acting, all the rituals, whether they're linguistic or whether they're financial or all the other information, knowledge structures that you use, they're all available for you to use in your doing. So, today I'll be speaking about these general categories and how they're systematically arranged in the human being as organized consciousness nature and the composite psychological complex, as well as how each human develops this complex and how they may wake up to consciously transforming it. Now, the gradual and gradated development of the human being from zygotic conception on through maturation, adulthood, senescence, etc., has been researched by many contemporary psychologists. Now, among them are Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs relating to general human development, as well as Jean Piaget and his 5 phases of cognitive development, or another illustration, Lawrence Kohlberg and his scale of moral development, a 6-fold scale, incidentally. And there are many other developmental researchers in the psychological field. However, as you're going to soon see, we are going to be expanding our concept and therefore our circumference of what constitutes human psychology past the experimental and behavioral models that are currently available, as well as the Freudian and the others. However, back to the developmental researchers in the psychological field, one common denominator in their findings is the phase development of the human psychophysical organism over time. This is ontogeny. It's the unfoldment according to DNA and other informational structures. That is what we commonly call growing up. As we move from one phase of development to another, beginning at conception, through birth, infancy, etc. In this session, we'll consider the developmental stages of growing up or developing as a human being, as well as waking up, which permits a human being to flourish as they focus on unfoldment of personal psychological powers through innate faculties. During a later session, we will speak of the 3rd phase of human development, which is lifting up. And that's helping others to grow up and or wake up. So, you'll remember the faculties of self and the coding that I used in terms of, and this is simply for graphic intelligence, everything relating to will is headed under green in conscience. Everything that has to do with feeling is yellow, in yellow for graphic intelligence. And everything that is in blue is the cognitive intelligence, here being referred to vivacience and living and doing. That's all there. So, we're going to move appropriately to the next of our cards, which is the cognology matrix of any growing human being. And you're going to notice that once again, what I've done is I've taken the various 5-fold groupings or categories, if you will, the taxa of the self, conscience, sentience, intelligence, vivacience, and we can go right down and see how they apply to the trigonic self. That is the 3 selves that last time we spoke of in terms of the empiric self, the epistic self, and the agnostic self. Now let us see if in my deck of cards here I actually have that. Yes, I do. Now, some gamblers carry a pack of cards. Some divinators have tarot cards. And this philosopher at large has graphic cards. So, one's self, that is your individual self, sometimes I call it the aeon, but the aeon, you have to understand, is the one applied to anything. It's like the point expanded to the circle in my omniversal model. All right, one self is the trigonic self. Divided into 3, it's all one, actually. That's why I refer to it in the other as the synergic self. But for the moment, let's break it up once again. The top part relating to the soteric self, and actually this should be, let's just use the simple explanation. The upper part is the agnostic self. The central part, which we often call the psyche or the soul, that relates to the epistic self, and your personality, your thoughts, your feelings, your body, the vital powers of living your personality as an organizing principle of egoity. That's all the person, that's all the empirical self. And I may have, let's see. we're going to go back to that. I may have, I think, a better chart that we used last time in relation to the trigonic self, where I broke down that the agnostic self, that is the upper part of the triangle. Remember, we're visualizing an octahedron in this instance, right? It's three-dimensional. So this actually, this circle, this is a sphere around there, and the upper triangle relates to your agnostic self, or pneuma, which we've spoke of before as being your monad, or often spoken of as your spiritual self. And here's your psyche, where most of your ego-related ideas, feelings, thoughts, and willings are part of your internal atmosphere, if you will, of your cognostic system. However, you're anchored into a three-dimensional world plus, but in this world of space-time, cause, effect, and entity, all four of those you need in this mix of manifestation called Maya. This is the realm of the empiric self and the personality, which is very adaptable. And that's what we're going to be dealing with today. We're going to be dealing with these in terms of faculties. So, the most important of these is your Echaic foundation. The Echaic foundation is actually the potencies of Chitta, according to Eastern doctrine. You'll see that I'm using the terms of Chitta, Buddhi, Ahamkara, and Manas. And these are from deep Indian philosophy that goes back not just centuries, but millennia. And I've incorporated them here because they are part of the omniversal system of a thought that is omniphilosophy. And as an omniphilosopher, I noticed that this very foundation for individuation is the principle of, actually, when you think of it, it's I am conscious being growing. You know that you are a growing individual, and here, with an identity, that's your ground. Ipseity actually is another word for just yourself. And Nisus is will, and aesthesis is feeling, because this is a very important faculty of the human being, the dimension of being Dasein, the dimension of being there in the world, here as an experiencing being. The foundational nature of aesthesis is a separate faculty in the human constitution. And that human constitution is embraced by taking all the aspects of soma, of soul, of spirit, and of source, and being able to consider them all at once in a matrix. And instead of calling it psychology, some have referred to it as esoteric psychology because it's given the hidden dimensional depths of what it means to be human. What is it to have a human nature and have a human ground? As the ground of your consciousness in nature, in the Echaic foundation for individuation, where the one becomes the particular one, the unique one as you. That individuation, those are potencies in that they all together function. And there's the Trinitarian idea. You know, you have three persons, if you will, three faces, but one substance. You find the same Trinitarian doctrine in the Buddhist notion of the Trikeya, which is the Dharmakaya, which is the same here as what I'm referring to as the spiritual self or pneuma. And then there's the Sambhogakaya, which is the same thing as the body of joy, which here is your solar self or psyche, and the Nirmanakaya, which is your body of emanation or manifestation, and that's the body, the empiric self that's used for operation in this world of manifestation. The Euripistic relation for transcendence is often what is referred to by Jean-Paul Sartre in his writings. That is, it's the ability of you as a consciousness to transcend the dimensionality that you are actually caught in as a living organismic being. So therefore, that transcendence, anytime you partake of the epistic relation of a subject and an object, that is, you have before your mind an idea of something, that represents the objective condition. An idea isn't necessarily the object that you are apprehending, but it's your apprehended object. And that apprehended object occurs within your psyche. Some refer to it as your soul. And most psychologists, depth psychologists, transpersonal psychologists, depth psychologists study a lot of the capacities of ahamkara, the I maker, your sense of egoity, which allows you this transcendence. But you have an empirical ego as well, one that's involved in the everyday world. You're not even thinking about it. For instance, when you perform your functions, you're not sitting there and going, well, I, the ego, am acting this way. You haven't abstracted yourself from the situation. You're quite immersed in it. And being immersed in that situation, that's called the epistic self. And that's the self which, of course, is ruled by the principle of utility. The principle of utility is that everything down here has a use. Everything is a cause and effect. Caught in a chain of cause and effect where everything is produced. It's a product. It's a composite being. It's not single. It's not permanent. It's not independent. It's interdependent relative to everything else. That is any event, any element, any essence, any energy. It's all interdependent. And that's its holistic aspect. As well as it has a collective aspect in that there's a localized cause and effect of entity, right, in space and time, such as everything that's happening here is quite localized as a causal series of events. However, that doesn't mean that it's not held within a larger cosmic nexus of cause and effect or causality. These can both be true. I have individual causation taking place here. Some call it individual karma. There's collective karma as I'm interacting with my ecosphere and my society and culture at large. And then there's holistic karma, which is everything all taken together within the cosmos, things that are so remote from our localized finite perception that we never even pay attention to it, except maybe remotely when we speculate about it in thought. Or if you are a mystic or a yogi, then you practice meditation and you experience the depths of the ontological well in which we are all immersed. This ontological well, translated into terms of cognology, that is, the science of consciousness, dealing with the various aspects, the three different levels, if you will, of being. And at some point, we're going to talk about the various levels and how this is broken down, if you will, in the various dimensions, some referring to them as planes. I think I can give you a brief glimpse of that. Just for reference sake. So eventually, our octahedron, our octogen, gets translated from the trigonic self in the terms that the trigonic self can be put into terms of ousia, or being. But so you have the different levels, the physical, the emotional, the lower intellectual, the higher mental, and then the Buddhic, that is your intuitive plane, and then the atmic, which refers to your willpower and a different kind of perception altogether, because it's the most expansive perception that you or I or anyone can have as an Atma, looking down and unifying all of our dimensions of being. And then there's the infinite dimension. I've referred to this center part, which most of us think of as our core, right? Our core and our psychological core, whether it's the supraliminal aspects of higher intuition and willpower that manifest as virtue, or whether it's your liminal consciousness going on right here and now, like a surfer on the sea of consciousness, or whether it's the subliminal aspects of your consciousness, the things that you're not paying attention to at the moment, but nonetheless are there. For instance, your language capability, your mathematical capabilities, you're not sitting there running through the multiplication table now. But if I ask you what 3 times 3 is, everybody knows it's 9. Okay, so let's go back to our Cognology matrix, and we're going to continue discussing the various faculties of buddhi. And now, buddhi is your spiritual self, and today that's really what I focus on in this program, because these are the very faculties of the I-Thou, which is the basis of achievement of unitive consciousness. And these things we all have. Our self has 2 faces, and that's why I refer to it as Theos, because we are grounded in conscious being, and we have one inward face that is always looking inward toward our conscious being, knowing that we are conscious. And that's this intuition of conscious being, this subjectively facing faculty of buddhi. Now, we also have an intellection of noya, that is the objects in our psyche. Doesn't matter whether it's a thought or whether it's a feeling, whether I'm depressed or elated, or whether it's a will, such as a resolution to do something. I'm going to go out tonight to dinner, for instance, and I resolve to do that. Or whether it's an actual doing, such as me rolling my hand here. It doesn't matter. All of that is immediately apprehended by your own consciousness, and that's intellection of noya. You know what you feel. You are certain about what you're thinking about. You may not be certain that a proposition you're holding, such as it's raining outdoors now, you may not be certain that that's true, but what is certain is that you are holding that proposition in consideration. These are all intellection of noya. And so, if we look at that in terms of the big picture of what each of us are in our foundational depths, in terms of our spiritual self, these are all faculties that are operative but are waiting to be fully achieved. And this is what Maslow was talking about as levels of transcendence. Because after you've actualized yourself, you've begun to wake up and live deliberately. At that point, there's also the capability of moving into higher and higher realms. The deeper you go, the higher you fly. The higher you fly, the deeper you go. So said sage John Lennon, right? Now, what's being spoken of here is that the higher up you go in terms of yourself, the deeper you're going to go into your potencies that are going to actually, through your faculties, be developed into capacities that you will use in this world as capabilities. So where does it all begin? Well, it doesn't begin. It's all here, all at once, already, right now. And all I'm doing is taking the matrix and presenting, if you will, a kind of graph of what constitutes each of us. So when we break it down in terms of our will, we're going to see that we have, is the ground of our being, and it's there in every one of these. We have conation and volition. Conation is your ongoing will. It's your will to live. It's your will to desire. It's your will to power. It's your will to know. It's a process where volition becomes a state. It's a fulminance. It's something that happens, and you make often a decision to do something. Although the decision you often make under your thinking, right, when you're cogitating on something, it may not always turn into that your volition is going to be able to have the resolution to carry it forward and activate it completely within your life. In other words, it was a fine notion, but it never rose to the level of a concrete action, which is what activation is. Vivification is the process of living. It's livingness. It's your reservoir of life. It's all the potency you have for living. And we will speak about waking up, and how what you're actually doing is you are revivifying. You are becoming more and more alive in your life as you take these cognostic turns. As you start to transform your life bit by bit, whether it's through the micro transformations of Tilopa's 6 words of advice that I think was step 2, or whether it is these other active practices, no matter from what tradition, that you start to employ, you are going to awaken the various potencies through these faculties. And the faculties that we're considering under Theos is you have, in this intuition of conscious being, you have a sense of the whole presence, unity, all at once. You couldn't place things in particular spots and have particular sections of sight or of sound or certain scenes of feeling or certain spans of time or certain series of events of cause and effect unless you first had a direct apprehension of the entirety of the one as a direct intuition. That doesn't mean you can put it in the words. It doesn't mean that your finite self, at this liminal moment, surfing on the consciousness that you have, listening to my words, it doesn't mean that that intuition of the whole is something that you can put in the words, or I can put in the words, or that we can somehow capture in finite language, because by its very nature it's infinite. So it's never going to be captured. Propositions may mirror reality accurately at times, leading to unmistaken cognizance, what we call knowledge. But it also can be mistaken. It can be mistaken consciousness. And we correct it later on by comparing, saying, oh, I see. That's just a stump at night. That's not a cat. I thought it was a cat. Right? My noia. I immediately thought it was a cat. It's a mistaken cognizance. When I go up there closer, shine a flashlight, and it's just a stump. Casting a shadow, in the gloaming of the crepuscular twilight. Now, when we look at Theos, it has not only the capacity to see the entirety of the unity of the cosmos, it has as well a self-presence. And that unity is a continuity. It's called Chittasantana in Eastern terminology. It's the stream of consciousness. It's unbroken. Likewise, with ethos, there is character, which we often think of as integrity of things, the integrity of a system, where all the parts function together properly so as to maintain the intactness of anything, whether we create it or whether it's a tree, whether it's naturally created. All right, that's its character. Personality has to do with its ability to use noia in an ever-changing world of manifestation. So personality comes from the Greek word persona, which was a mask, which Greek actors used down on the stage of the amphitheater in order to cast their voices into the audience. So there was a built-in megaphone in this huge mask, and that was its persona. It was the actor's character that they were portraying. So at any given moment, this very adaptable personality you have has many personae. You have a different face of the person when you speak to your mother or father than you do to your boss, or if you're an employer, to a new employee, rather than somebody who's been there 20 years. You employ different persona for different roles in different situations, in different occasions, with different people. If you are a teacher, you have one persona. Then when you go back home and you're with your partner, you have another persona. So all these personas link together under a central ego we call the personality. And that is what psychologists typically study, the personality down here in terms of its empiric operation. Those who go into depth psychology look at the transcendence aspects of the epistic relation of the solar self, and that is all the feelings, the willings, the doings that are embedded in memory, that serve as a foundation for projection and imagination, or that are the actual contents of your experience, your synoia. All your feelings and thoughts and willings and whatever, at any given moment, that's your synoia. S-Y-N-N-O-I-A, synoia. It's all of it together. And there's a lot of it you're not paying attention to at any given moment. None of us do. That's part of the concealing nature of consciousness, which we will get into at another time. Because there's also a revealing aspect. You only pay attention to so much at one time, and the rest drops in to the backstage where there's a lot of chatting going on. Anyway, so transpersonal psychologists are looking at the Gnostic constitution. What they're really looking at are these faculties. So when somebody is speaking about the humanism of transpersonal psychology, they're talking about these various faculties that we all have. We all have a faculty of life where we have a reserve of vitality, often called the elan vital from Bergson, or in the display of that reservoir of living energy is your vivacity. It's the entelechy, as Aristotle, to use Aristotle's terms, that is, it's the very end being unfolded as the means. The vehicle, in other words, my words, have a life to them, a vivacity to them, that indicates where my words are going. Everything indicates its nature by its performance. So a human being indicates their nature by performing speech and thought and healthy social interaction, etc. Long list there. And you can do that with any species, right? What is their nature? Well, we're looking at the human species here, Anthropos. We're looking at humans and saying that every human being has this inner reserve of life as well as the ability to express it vivaciously. They have an understanding that is a discernment intellectually or through their intelligence of the world, plus they have reason, which is a process to come to judgment about certain things in the world so that it can be integrated into understanding. The two aspects of pathos are actually a polarity, agape and eros, or agape. Now, agape is essentially gratitude and relates to this sense of whole presence, doesn't it? Just like understanding relates to a sense. It's making sense of the whole. It's what understands your view of the world. That's your understanding. That's your discernment. You come to that bit by bit. You come to gratitude bit by bit. Gratitude's other pole is eros. It's self-gratification. Agape is your sense of other self within you. Someone once described love as your heart walking around in another body. Well, agape, as well as eros, that is your ability to gratify yourself. You have an ability, if you will, to gratify others, and to do that in such an impartial way that it emanates from you as gratitude. You find them precious enough, it doesn't matter whether it's a pet or whether it's a lover or whether it's a relative. You find them so precious, you feel them so precious in your life. Where does that come from? That's agape. It's inherent in you, just like self-gratification is inherent in you. Gratitude for the other, for having a precious life in which you can fulfill yourself and your feelings in interaction with them can only happen because of entertainment, because of being able to touch one another. So this is a polarity, which is extremely important for all of us because we don't want to get trapped in, right, just always reasoning things out, trying to look for what is it trying to increase our understanding. We don't always just want to gratify ourselves at the expense of being grateful to the universe and to those around us. And we don't want to just personally adapt to things. We want a character whose structure or virtue takes us into the future, this is related to time, just like this is related to space, and this is related to entities, and this is related to energies. Cause and effect. And these are all put together under the auspices of self. So I think I've covered everything in terms of the faculties of buddhi. Now, buddhi operates on the level of the spiritual self under the principle of unity. Everything that is done in that sphere has a holistic ramification, and the achievement of somebody in attaining that holistic vision and participation leads to the next table of the wisdom of consciousness, Cognosy, This is cognology. We're just studying consciousness at this point. So let's look at the epistemic or the epistic relation for transcendence and the capacities of Ahamkara. This is normally called your soul or your solar self. In here, there's the I other. That's the basis of unfoldment of the fusive consciousness of subject and object. In other words, in the epistic relation, you are actually quite aware that you are a subject beholding an object, whether it's you that hold a feeling, or you that hold a resolution, or you that behold a vision or hear a sound in the outer world. It doesn't matter. All of these things are related to you as deixis, that is, as a self-experiencing individual. And you have the capability as deixis for self-reference. You refer to yourself or you refer to others. And here you do it in a equipotent or neutral fashion. There's no, in the epistic relation, there is no preference for one or the other. You have to have both the subject and the object in order to have a relationship that we call of knowledge. So, the capacities of the self, which can refer to itself, can refer to others in its psychological state, its psychic state, its solar state. It has the power of poiesis, orexis, theoria, and praxis, which this is creativity, Heidegger's term, right? This is this creative life urge that we have. This is our knowledge, as Aristotle said, all men by nature desire to know. So theoria is a different way in which we, under the epistemic principle of correspondence, that is, this relates to the epistemology, the way that you, as Ahamkara, as this eye maker, this subject who is always beholding an object dualistically, this is how you approach the world, the way we all approach the world, through intelligence and thinking. We either think in terms of apposition, and apposition is this. God is like humans in that he thinks and he feels. All right? I'm making an analogy, an apposition. I had a professor one time said 90% of our thinking is appositional thinking. That is, we're always making analogies and comparisons. And that's the way we arrive at things. We say, she's much like my mother, or he has certain characteristics. He reminds me of somebody, a past friend. We're always apposing things, oppositing things, putting them not only just next to one another, but likening them in certain degrees to each other by some common characteristic. So we draw analogies. Another way in which we think, and that's all we're really doing here, we're considering thinking here from your psychological angle. You can not only do it appositionally, you can do it propositionally, right? This is a pointer. I'm making a declarative statement, an assertoric statement. This is a pointer. I'm making a proposition. There's a subject, there's a predicate, and I'm affirming something in this particular proposition about this thing I'm denoting with my finger through ostensive definition. As I'm pointing at it. I'm not defining it linguistically or semiotically. I'm just pointing at it. I'm saying this. And that is juxtaposition. That's another way that you consider the world. You just put one thing next to another, right? I can juxtapose this to this, to this, to this, to this, these different cells, and I can arrange things. And that allows you, therefore, to consider them in your mind. Now, I may draw analogies, right? And I do. I say, hey, appositionally speaking, hey, these things all in blue, they all relate to thinking and intelligence. Everything here in this column, it's yellow for a reason. It all relates to feeling. All right. So, another way in which we think is through composition. That is, we take the various things we might have put into propositions and we start to compose things from them, such as an argument, a philosopher might do for a philosophic paper, or we start to put images that we've juxtaposed together, as a painter might do, an image of a certain person in the foreground, and they're envisioning a very eerie background, like Michelangelo's Mona Lisa, right? Strange background. Anyway, the juxtaposition, he put it together, Da Vinci that is, in terms of a composition, but that was done first of all by thinking. All right. Let's take praxis, doing. That's under the epistemic principle of conditionality. You have to know what the conditions are before you're going to be able to refrain from doing something or getting rid of something or getting something, acquiring something, or keeping something. Now, those are the four things fundamentally that you can do, right? You can either refrain from doing an activity, you can either rid yourself of certain activities or thoughts or feelings you've done before. You can acquire or get new virtues, strengths, talents, money, artwork, whatever you decide that you want to acquire. But then there's the matter of keeping it. You don't just get it, acquire it. Do you have also that ability to keep what it is that you've gotten? Well, you look at this in terms of building virtue, and this is exactly what the Buddha spoke of as right effort. Right effort, that is right doing, consists of this: refraining from doing what is harmful, unsuitable, unvirtuous, or what some people call evil or wrong. Refrain from doing it. If you've done it before, get rid of it. So these two relate to what might be called unsuitable doings. You want to get rid of something that's unsuitable, or you want to refrain from it if you haven't picked up the bad habit yet. If you don't smoke, refrain from doing it. If you do smoke, get rid of it. Right, there's an example. And this the Buddha applied to building virtue, which is, of course, character, which is the very thing that thrusts you into that transition we call transformation. So these are very important. And to continue in the Buddha's modeling, he said, well, if you don't have things that are suitable or virtuous, well, get them. And if you do have them, for instance, you have compassion for sentient creatures, keep it. So these are the ways that you live and the ways you do. These are the ways you think. These are the ways that you feel. Now remember this. This is why I chose this, is thesis as the word. And you'll notice all these words here. Latin and from Greek roots. And the reason I did that philosophically is because I don't want people to think that it is a certain kind of feeling, right? Feeling is very different. You've got feeling of touch, you've got emotional feelings, you've got sentiments, which are more complex feelings, right? Don't you? You have passions, which are well-irrigated feelings. In fact, they're canalized into a particular affection. You have affects. These are particular kinds of psychological feelings. And then you have other more numinous feelings that are sometimes referred to as ecstasy. There's a whole range of feelings. The important thing is this: all feeling presumes touch, right? So, you're already in touch with yourself. That's what we're talking about with affectivity up here. You already have an ongoing process of feeling. Every now and then, when it comes to the surface and fulminates, we call it sensitivity. You're sensitive to this person. You're sensitive to this word. You're sensitive to some impression you have. You're sensitive to a memory that arises within your psyche. And through orexis, this feeling that comes about becomes a complex here psychologically. Just like your theoria is your capacity in your psyche to think in these various ways. This is your capacity here under Deixis, that is your sense of self, right? Because it's your feelings, not somebody else's. That's what we're talking about here. Deixis is your sense of convergence. That's the epistemic principle of convergence. It's all converging on you, right? You couldn't have a memory unless it was anchored to you. You couldn't have a feeling unless it somehow was anchored to you as the subject that is having that feeling, whether it's a passion or whether it's a sense of touch. And remember this, in terms of feeling, it's all extensive, just like intelligence and vivacience, right? It isn't like, oh, life is just in my eye. No, life is throughout my body and beyond, but visibly, life is within all parts of my body. Well, so is feeling. And when you stop and look at it, the Buddhists are absolutely correct in their epistemology when they say that all the senses really boil down to touch. True? Photons, what are they touching? The retina. Odorants, chemical compounds that become our smells, that hit our nostrils. Physical. Touch. Touch our nasal organs are for sensing smells. Food in the mouth for taste. Touch. Hearing. Compression of airwaves upon the eardrum. Once again, touch. So aesthesis or feeling permeates your entire being as an ontum, as a sentient being. You as an aeon, as a complete being, have pervasive feeling in the same way that you have pervasive intelligence and you have pervasive will. It isn't as if when I will my hand to move, you can have a power of will that just motivates certain parts of the hand. No. My entire brain is telling the rest of my body, here's what's going on. And it's all coordinated at once. Why? Well, we're all a unity to begin with, right? With a continuity that continues. And here at the epistemic level, we look and we can break these things apart from inside, that is our own introspective universe. In terms of poiesis, your creativity, that is the epistemic principle of coherence, just like with theoria, it's correspondence, right? When you make a proposition then, okay, this is a pointer, and I'm making an assertion. There's got to be some correspondence between what I say, what I think, and what this is. So that's what I'm talking about with the epistemic principle of correspondence. And here, in terms of consistency, you can't feel something that's inconsistent with your ability to feel it. I couldn't feel this pointer, right? Unless it was consistent, the pointer being absolutely consistent in terms of the scene with my senses. And I couldn't move the pointer around with praxis, right? And here, I'm making this movement, right? I didn't have it before. I'm getting it now. I got it. There it goes. All right, that's praxis in action. But now, before I even did that, in terms of my will, operating under the epistemic principle of coherence, where everything has to cohere together in some interdependent fashion, I begin by, first of all, envisioning, hey, take an artist, all right? Or take a researcher, or take you when you're going to do problem solving. First of all, you got to envision what it is that you want to solve. You got to ask a question, you've got to set a parameter, you got to say to yourself, okay, all right, how many chickens in my coop are laying eggs in a day? Well, you got to start to envision how it is that you're going to determine that. If you're a painter, you say, okay, my next project. What am I going to creatively do? Well, let me think about this. So the initial steps in the creative process are envisioning. And then the next step is gathering. You start to do sketches. You gather pictorial ideas by making the sketches. If you're a researcher, you start to gather your evidence. You define your scope of work for your project, your research project. Now you gather your evidence. And you start making your case. You define your thesis. You start to hone your arguments. You see clearly where it is where you want to go. You work at this gathering, this organizing. It's not just collecting, but you have to categorize. You have to organize, build, an architectonic take shape, and you start to fill it up. And that takes a lot of time for most people. Some people spend an awful lot of time envisioning before they actually begin to gather on a project. Just think of anything that you're going to do in a planned fashion as an act of will, sustained will, a will that's going to carry out through action steps, right? That's essentially what you're talking about here with gathering and the envisioning. After you've assembled all the information, after you've built your architectonic, after you've made your argument, you think, after you've come to your conclusions, so you believe, or you don't have conclusions and you're stymied. You're at an impasse intellectually. That's the time to let things incubate. That's the period where subliminally your subconscious is going to make these arrangements, much like happens during the consolidation periods of sleep. When you're asleep at night, your brain is very active, consolidating, gathering information, and then putting it all together and seeing where it lies, letting it incubate. And you wake up, and what? All of a sudden, goodness sakes, things start again. Originating is often called, at this point, illumination. It's the aha moment. Things that were laying, they fell into place. Now you wake up to a new vision, an original vision. You originate something that hadn't been there before. So we've covered, I believe, all the aspects of the epistemic ego, the epistic self, the soul, the psyche, your internal operations. Now, let's go to the empiric operations out here in the outer world for transaction as I'm transacting with you now. I have all kinds of psychic things going on in my psyche, don't I? But at the same time, right here, right now, my concrete mind is directed toward instruction. I'm utilizing a number of my capabilities as I do that. My creative skills, you can see displayed in my graphic art, which is what it is actually, but these display part of my technique. That is, my creative activity is eventually going to develop certain techniques that I employ. Technique, as Heidegger uses it, just like he uses Sophos, which is the fallout from theoria. And when praxis, all you're doing, it's going to lead to your practical skills. You know, Ludwig Wittgenstein spoke of cultural forms of life and these practical skills, whether it's language or whether it's learning how to operate your silverware utensils during high dining. These are all practical skills that you learn basically through imitation, right? You imitate the mother tongue, and that's what you speak. So these practical skills, right, you see your father pick up a hammer and hammer a nail into a board, and then you try it yourself, and you develop practical skills. Well, at school, whether you're in schooling or not, you develop your cognitive skills. The good news is your cognitive skills can be rapidly developed in school through formal training and discipline. And we all need that in order to organize not only our thoughts, but our life, our feelings, and our willpower. So that's a very important function. However, the downside is you become indoctrinated, just as you do in religion. And these create doxa, and these become what I've called the phantasmagoric cartolophalatry. That is the worship of maps, cognitive maps, phantasmal maps, mental maps of your own confabulated thinking. And as Korzybski says, the map should not be confused with the territory, right? If you're going to go to Europe and go through the Alps and you look at a map, a topographical map, and you use Google and you look down and go, oh, there's the roadway. That's the one I want to take up there to Lucerne. Right. Okay. That's the map. When you get in the car and you drive there, that's the territory. They may be two different things, but you see, one is experience, and the other is, in one way or another, it's testimony. It's the representation of something indirectly. It's not the experiencing of the territory directly. It's using a medium, whether it's the old-fashioned highway map, or whether it's a Google map, or whether it's even real-time. Looking down, you can participate visually then, right? In that sense, you're actually doing something if you're looking through a satellite that's in real time, or let's say a drone, and you're seeing what's going on below, but you're still not there directly participating in it with your own eyes. You're doing it remotely. And that's what the Hubble telescope is doing, right? It's our remote set of eyes. It's our collective eyes. We built it together. That's what culture does, right? That's what working together. Culture means circle. And when you work together collectively, you start creating things. This is not something that I created on my own. This is something that's part of a collective circle which has been passed on to me and which I myself developed through my own poesis. So these are my creative skills. Part of my creative skills is this, as well as articulating what is often been called cosmic smarts or intelligence, your spiritual intelligence. But we all have philia, social skills, as well as our cognitive skills and our practical skills. So we have these four sets of skills developed by will, right? By love, by mind, and by living and doing. And that leads us through self-maturation, self-development. And that puts us into a condition where we are able to contribute something to the world. We can contribute things through our capabilities, our creative skills, our social skills, our cognitive and practical skills. Now, once we learn how to do that, then all this which has developed, your entire cognological constitution, which has developed, and if you will, has crowned itself now with these various levels of skills in the empirical world, well, at that point, then you can wake up to the matrix of the awakening human. And you can activate these hidden powers which before you developed as you matured. from zygote, through fetus, through birthed infant, through baby, through child, through teen, through young adulthood, senescence, and eventually moving on. However, as you awaken, you are taking what fundamentally were your basic potentialities and you are now actualizing them. You are actualizing these potentialities of consciousness, of chitta. So you achieve not just the foundation, now since activating it, it becomes an attainment. It's a unition. You feel united with the ground of consciousness, which I term aseity, which is the unity of the self. All selves. You participate as the one self in all selves and yourself. And there's no contradiction in doing all of that together. The self is deep. The self is multidimensional. The self not only is ever-changing, but is unchanging. The self is not a contradiction. It is a living paradox when you consider it as a proposition in terms of thinking, right? Theoria, when you're considering things, you go, well, life, does it begin, does it end? Those are propositions. What you want to do is you want to experience what life is. You want to directly experience what consciousness is. It's not just enough to develop your faculties and your capacities and your capabilities through your spiritual, solar, and somatic selves. It's not enough just to do that. That is to grow up, to develop. But you want to wake up. Now, why do you want to wake up? Because waking up is a fun thing to do. Waking up is the point in which the moment becomes real. Waking up is where what was contracted now expands. What was once just a mute feeling becomes resonant bliss. Where once was a closed belief becomes an experienced vision. What once was a bound life now becomes a liberated action for the sake of others, in which you energize your entire being by performing it. Right? It's achieving sovereignty. Waking up achieves sovereignty by building virtue. That is, you can trust yourself. You can rely on yourself. You build a character. A character not operating just when people are looking. That's part of your personality. That may be part of your persona. Hey, I want to make it look good. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about endurances of character that you can trust in, that you can have faith in, because they're proven to you. You look at any great, wise woman or man, and the one thing that they have is a bedrock character. And it's a higher character, and it's part of that, the deeper you go, the higher you fly. Because awakening is not just something that happens in your intelligence. It is not just where you experience the ground of space as infinity and the ground of feeling as the totality of everything that can or will ever be. Or the eternality, that is, there is no time in terms of past, present, or future, or before or after. Eternality, it's the absence of time. Infinity, it's the absence of obstructive contact. It's pure vacuum. And that's the Buddhist idea of space. It's lack of obstructive contact. Infinity is that in terms of space. And in terms of life, purity, where nothing is being performed, nothing is being done. There is no doing whatsoever, but there is the basis of having anything done. If there was something being done, it would not be pure at this level of unition. There would already have something being done. But with purity, it's the possibility of something being done. With infinity, it's the possibility of space being occupied. With totality, it means that there can be any single thing, whether it's a pointer or paper or wood. It's all part of a totality that includes the very parts that are referenced. Eternality turns into time, where we have a temporal sensibility. And our sense of self and the unity that we have and that we experience within ourselves is part of the greater omniversal unity of which we all participate in, and which I refer to as the One Self, and others have as well. The nature of consciousness that is developed by an individual who is awakening at this level is identification with the self. It's intensification of the will. It's inspiration of feeling. Here's the illumination part that is most often referred to by those who have awakened, right? The illumination of the thinking, where now intelligence begins to really see the nature of reality, as well as you are immersed into that reality in a way that before was less than complete. It was more contracted than it is once you begin to awaken the actualities of your consciousness. So, I am conscious being awakening. I am conscious being awakening. When I was growing, I said, I am conscious being developing. Right? I'm a developing conscious being. Now I'm saying, I am a being that's awakening. What kind of conscious being are you? Are you just growing? Are you also awakening? Well, if you're starting to experience, remember, these are going to be experienced, first of all, as states of samadhi, that is, in deep meditation. But however, samadhi in meditation doesn't just stay there. Through repetition, through practice, constant practice, that becomes part of your, if you will, ritual of consciousness at the psychological level, so that transformations take root and they begin to change you. So there's the instantaneity. When you have identification, intensification, inspiration, illumination, and immersion, when you have, and these all five happen together, they don't happen separately. With certain people, such as if you're a philosopher or a scientist, you're going to focus probably on the illumination aspects of your expanded state of unitive consciousness, right? If you're a devotionalist and you're a bhakti yogi and you're somebody who chants the name of the Lord or offers prayers or is very devotional in terms of whether it's Christian, Hindu, Islam, Taoist, it doesn't matter. But if you take the way of the heart, then in all likelihood, you're going to experience ecstasy or inspiration in your somatic moments, in your deep meditative moments. And it's like that as well. If you're an Agni Yogi, that is somebody who's an activist. And if you're an activist, that is an Agni Yogi, somebody who's involved in applying their will to change the world, then you are going to be using your various somatic enterprise to intensify the will. And that's going to be the first thing where a philosopher might experience illumination, and a devotionalist, inspiration. A creative individual or an activist individual can well experience an intensification of the will. Just like somebody who immerses themselves in daily practices of either Kriya Yoga or some other form of subtle yoga practice may find themselves in the immersive experience, and the Kundalini travels up the spine to the crown of the head. And in a similar way, those who are very focused in terms of mystic achievements and the centering of the self that is non-dualistic, they are going to have a sense of increased identification with the one self. These are all transformative stages within, respectively, the personality, the psyche, and what is often called the spirit, or, as I refer to it, as the anosic self, your unitive self. And this instantaneity are all of these things as they happen together as part of your fundamental identity consciousness, and that is unition. For recognition, I'm using the term here, pratyabhijna, which is where you rediscover, as it were, the innate truths that constitute your being. That is the instantaneity which occurs. In terms of the faculties that are awakened in Buddhi, the I-Thou relationship, that's the achieving awakening of the unitive consciousness of the One. And these are all the active elements of the faculties that are awakened. And from the cosmic angle, synergia, there is for Theos, that is that divine intuition that is looking at the one Purusha, the one self, and at the same time can look at its contents of experience, its noya, all at once. It experiences these in syntension. Well, syntension, synchrony, syzygy, syncosm, and syncadana are all cosmic aspects. If you will, they're the way that the cosmos, the one self, operates in its dimensions. There is, for instance, in terms of time, a perfect synchrony of everything with everything else as it unfolds in time. Syzygy means that there is always polar opposites that are going to co-found one another. You can't have cold and heat except when both exist, because one is simply the absence of the others. That's syzygy. Light and dark. They're polar opposites, but yet you wouldn't know what light is unless there was darkness, or darkness unless there were light. Syncosm means if you were to take an instant snapshot of this universe, and an instant, boom, the cosm, all together, as if it existed as a photo, that would be syncosm. Just like synchrony is its unfolding in time, syncosm is its structure in space. Syncadana is the chain of cause and effect, but remember this, syncadana means this, that it isn't just me who's causing something, or you who's causing something. We're all causing things together all at once already. Now, you'll experience this as an awakening human being as synechy. That is, synechy is a sense of continuity, flawless momentum. It is uninterrupted continuity, not from moment to moment, but as a flow. That is the way life is experienced at the spiritual level, as a flow of power. Simultaneity is the object and the subject appear simultaneously. One does not appear without the other, right? That's part of the epistic relation. However, here, that simultaneity within the mind is part of what allows the objective universe to be beheld in any of its aspects simultaneously by a mind which beholds its own noia. We'll speak of the causative chain that has that happen at another point, perhaps. Syncope. Think of syncopated swimmers, right? Everybody's moving in touch with everyone else. It's all a matter of essential, precise patterning. And that's what syncope is. It's your pathos. It's where you're able to syncopate your feelings and your emotional affective life with the social beings around you in terms of your social skills. These are all syncopated at a very high level spiritually. And you feel that syncopation in the form of where, like Buddha, you go, how wonderful, how wonderful. Everything is perfect exactly as it is. It couldn't be this way without perfection. I'm not talking about your sense of what you would see as an idealized state. No, I'm talking about the ability of a cause to perfectly form an effect. That's a miracle. But that's inherent in our world. That's something that's going on all the time because of the purity of the world, right? Up here. We're immersed in it, certainly, and that's what you realize at that highest level of source, where everything is synthesized. Here in the spiritual level, where you're awakening your faculties and becoming a seer, I mean, somebody's attained this state up here as a saint. I put that because they're stainless. That's all we're talking about. In this case, it's not a Christian saint or it's not a Hindu saint. It's a saint. A saint is anybody who has achieved this super sense of being awakened and at one with everything else, where they are absolutely identified with the one. Here, we have these various synergic elements, intention, synchrony, being, and syzygy, syncosm, and syncadana, being related to gnosis. That is the inner awakening, right? Gnostics, Christian Gnostics. They looked at the Bible and they said, well, listen, you know, when Paul says Christ in you, the hope of glory, he's not talking about Jesus Christ as a concrete individual. He's talking about a state of consciousness, Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness in you, that's the hope of glory. What is glory? It's the attainment, it's the unfoldment, it's the achievement of all these faculties that we're talking about, and which we'll refer to in our next session when we're speaking about generating conscious immortality. For the time being, what we're going to see is that all of these things of when you have a singular sense of your identity as being one, and this happens in awakening, being at one with the one, right? Plotinus said, it's the flight of the alone, small a, to the alone, capital A. Plotinus said, union is the flight of the alone to the alone. You isolate yourself in individuality and identity. But it's not your egoic individuality and identity that's at play. That's shaped over here in this psychic realm we call the soul. There, in your introspective stage, you have realized epistemia. And the first thing you realize in terms of your deixis, that is your sense of selfhood on this plane where you are self-aware as an internally recognized, self-recognizing consciousness, the moment you think about it, like awakening, the awakening mantra, I am conscious of being conscious, You turn yourself inward, and you're immediately going to see what I call idiotensegrity. Tensegrity is a word from Buckminster Fuller. It refers to tension and integrity. It's the tense integrity of the system, all the elements working and functioning together, that gives not only wholeness and completeness, but gives it the endurance and functionability, serviceability. Your ideo, it's unique to you. The way you're stringing together your spirit, soul, and soma, your pneuma, your psyche, your personhood, the way those are all strung together is your unique way of doing it. And that center right there of idiotensegrity is really the point in the sphere where the upper and the lower meet at the center. It's called Madhya Shakti, central power in Tantra. The central power is the power that exists in that point to expand into the sphere. So, in terms of the ahamkara and this psychic realm, you achieve idiotensegrity, but as well in terms of will, you have intrepidity. You're fearless. You're audacious. You're bold. You're a mover. You're a shaker. You're somebody to be reckoned with because you have a fearless attitude on taking on the world. And that is because of your fruits of your sovereignty and your virtue. Just like you've cultivated through contemplation and through wakefulness and mindfulness this centered mastery in yourself. And here, under Orexis, instead of chasing desire after desire after desire, you're a developed human being. And now you've satisfied most, if not all, of your desires, and realize that no matter what desire you are going to satisfy, it is eventually going to lead to cessation. So whether you have the desire or not, you remain imperturbable. Whether things are good or ill, whether it's rough seas or calm waters, you are still in serenity. This is your fruit, and you are experiencing the bliss of that fruit, that feeling of serenity. It's not just things have calmed down. It's not like just a calm lake, right? You feel it. That's the bliss. All right. Insight is what you develop in terms of epistemia that are realized. When you come to self-realization, you're going to not only be imperturbable, you're going to be somebody who's going to be very pacific, balanced, and at equipoise, at least most of the time. And you'll eventually get to all of the time, like some of the great saints. And you may have met a few in your life, sometimes without even knowing it. Well, here, now, your theoria and all the propositions you've considered, all the appositions, that is, the analogies you made. You know, I'm like this, she's like that, they're like so and so. All that has been distilled now into insight in the same way that in terms of praxis, all the rituals that you've repeatedly performed, all the things that you've lived in your life actively and passively, now you perform impeccably. Your skills and your services that you give to the world as these cultivated fruits are impeccably served. Impeccability. You'll notice that term from Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda. All right, all of these together, centered mastery through your set of skills. This is the integrity of the psyche. You'll notice that word integrity, which is amplifying this aspect of tensegrity. So integrity not only means that you can rely on yourself at this point, right? Because you have these things that now are fruits. So since you can rely fully on yourself, you've mastered what the Buddha says. Remember, he says, be ye refuge onto yourself. He reminded his disciples over and over and over again that the only and the ultimate refuge is one's consciousness. And that's here, the integrity of the psyche. This is the diffusive consciousness where you realize that all the fruits that you cultivated, right, they were all dependent on the objects that you cultivated it with. Whether they were internal objects or external objects like people and things and institutions, you've learned that. So now there's an empiric revelation. So you are not just going to develop at this point, you're not just grown up, you're going to develop integration. That is, you're going to expand and contribute to the world and make an impact on it. And these are your awakened capabilities of your mind or manas. And this is the specialist. For instance, I referred to that state earlier of the professional state where you get into it and you've got the flow. You're just, you lose a sense of time when you're doing your accounting procedures, or when you're painting, or when you're doing your Tai Chi, or when you're running. You enter a zone. That's pronoia. That's your experiential enoia. Remember, these are the elements of happiness that go into eudaimonia, into creating the sense of happiness that you have as a human being when you balance all these things together, right? All right. So here, in terms of apodexis, that is your empirical personal understanding of the world, as an awakening being, you're going to have a greater vision or view on the world, and there will be times you have a eunoia. That is, you're going to have a sense of the oneness of all. There are going to be times you have a metanoia. That is, these are going to be transformative experiences. Something happens in your psyche where either it snaps or you have a peak experience. That's metanoia. Cognoia is, it's called many things, but it's awe, wonder, it's the sense of absorption in the beauty of the moment as it happens with people, with things. It can be your love of nature, it's awe. This is dianoia, that is applied, sustained, focused thinking, such as when you're problem solving, as we were speaking of later, or when you're paying deliberate attention to a book you're reading, or to an argument that's being made on screen by a philosopher at large, or anything else that occupies your attention in the world. And pronoia is this professional state we've spoken of. All of these are examples of enoia. That is, they're the moments of transformative knowledge in your personal daily empirical experience. Now, lastly, the powers, new powers, novel powers that are awakened within the individual. First of all, there's plenipotency. Plenipotency is, if you will, think of the self as the ruler, the regent, the one who is in control as the watcher and the actor of yourself. Plenipotency means that all these things, integrating all of these together, whether it's conscience, sentience, intelligence, or vibrations, it's done by a self who is plenipotent. It has full power to integrate, organize, unify, sustain, and continue. Purpose. Well, as you have peak experiences throughout life, it's going to unfold a new sense of purpose, a deeper sense of personal purpose. People in this world lack two things, basically, to begin with in terms of will. They lack a sense of purpose, and they are absorbed in the world. Purpose helps orient them in the world as well as so they can fly high and dive deep. So, Cognoya sends that sense of awe, whether it's of a person or a love relationship or a sunset, leads to prima, that is pure love. It's not comma, it's not the love that you have passionately or romantically or for anything, affectionately. It's a divine form of love because what you've discovered is preciousness. There's endearment, right? As we've spoken of before. That's one of the fruits. The endearment. Okay. And then when it comes to dianoia, that's going to lead, of all things, to prophecy. Yes, I mean exactly that. I mean exactly that. You've been around people and a certain person enough where you can be very prophetic. You know exactly what they're going to do. You can be prophetic about yourself from past experience and taking your theoria and distilling it into the sophos, that is, the wisdom, the cognitive skills to know exactly what's going to happen. Now, you may not know the roll of the dice, but you know what? In terms of prophecy, you're going to pretty well know how the day's going to start. You're going to pretty well know what direction this is going to happen. But prophecy really refers to, in situations in the here and now, you can make the inferences because of reason. You've done it before, and it's part of your discernment, your understanding. You know, up there, right? From up in the higher levels, it's distilled down, and you can be prophetic. You know what somebody's going to do before even they know it at times. So, besides prophecy being some religious aspect, it is a cognitive or epistemic aspect to your and each of our lives as we awaken. And the last is proficiency. You are going to develop your skills so that they're highly tuned in. Proficiency is being able to do the right thing at the right time for the right person, to the right degree in the right way, for the right reason. So, next time what we are going to consider is the in-between, between the cognology, that is the description of the human constitution, on the three levels we were talking about, all integrated at the highest archaic level, or archaic level, and Cognosy, which is the fruits of transformation. We're going to talk about the cognistics in between and how you actually generate conscious immortality. And so we will deal with that in our next conversation. However, before we leave, let's do one of those cognostic techniques. And the one that I have in mind today is, for of all things, Pathos. Here we are. So, step number 4, awakening Pathos. This is our exercise to conclude today's seminar. Call yourself to purpose by utilizing the awakening mantra. I am conscious of being conscious. Step through that door. Then next, consider the spiritual or Buddhic faculty of pathos and its effective poles of love of self and love of another sentient being. Both are forms of affection along an axis of love, with one pole anchored in your unique self and the other infinitized to the omniverse with all its conscious interactive beings. Nevertheless, realize both poles exist within you. Pathos is an innate faculty that affectively unites you with the rest of reality. That's very key. It doesn't do it intellectually. It doesn't do it through doing. It doesn't do it through willing. It does it through touching. It does it through ethos. It does aesthesis. It does it through affectivity. Now, choose one of those beings. Try a person with whom you're currently having a grievance. Perhaps holding and imagine inner dialogues with that person as you try to figure out just what to suitably say. As you contemplate a solution, practice the following. Now, a good way to find out just how pathos functions within yourself along the polar self-other axis, as you mindfully watch that faculty in action, is to close your eyes and say to yourself, now, it's going to be hard to do unless you've memorized these. However, for the moment, you can close your eyes and use this as your awakening pathos exercise. Think of that person. Now, before I say or do anything, will it bring tears to their eyes, trouble to their life, turmoil to their mind, travel to their heart, or torment to their soul? Take a few moments to pause long enough after each phrase question, as you perform this later on, to watch your imagination mutate your social self in psychic rehearsal to your own introspective stage. You may slide along Pathos's polar axis, finding a particular spot to imaginatively stage a new ability when responding to that person, in essence generating a new responsibility. Its realization leads to serenity and bliss. So, my friends, until next time, behave if you must. Be good whenever you can. But above all else, be yourself.